If you watch CNN News, you've probably seen veteran journalist Jim Clancy anchoring the global news wrap, The Brief. Clancy stopped by our studio on Monday after the historic partnership between CNN International and our sister station, Sportsmax. I had a chance to quiz him on a few global issues that many in the Caribbean can relate to. It seems to me that one of the few times the Caribbean actually makes international news is when there is something involving an expat. Why would you say that is? Or first of all, would you agree with that?
I think you're right. The weather, I think, is the number one driving factor in news in the Caribbean. Everybody is interested when a storm hits because it could be on their way, and people are genuinely concerned about the effects of weather. But you're right. It does seem that sometimes when it's an expat of some kind who becomes involved in some kind of criminal activity, I guess people look at the Caribbean as a great place to retire or to escape to.
You mentioned the weather, and of course, that's one of the top things that we focus on here as well, especially hurricanes. What's the experience like in Atlanta at CNN covering that type of phenomena?
You know,
Is climate change a really big deal?
climate change is a huge deal because it's affecting all of us in different ways. But the global climate change is affecting people who live on islands, specifically low-lying islands. Like if you're in the Maldives or the Comoros Islands, you're really worried because if it were to come, the seas were to rise a meter, you would lose almost all of your territory, and they're having to face the reality that they may have to move. There are reports that indicate that the whole state of Florida, the city of Miami, could be under 100 feet of water in a matter of 150 years. Well, I won't be here to see that. You might make it, but you know, people are concerned about it, and it's affecting people's jobs, it's affecting people's lives.
Now, I know this is a very broad question, but what would you say is issue number one in the world right now?
Issue number one in the world right now is finding a way forward for young people, this next generation, to find jobs, to feel like they're a part of the society, to feel like government is working for them. The entire Arab Spring, everything you see, it is not about politics. It's about economics. It's about having a chance. It all started with that little vegetable fruit vendor who the police destroyed his cart, and he felt like they've robbed me of even the hope of a better future. In Brazil, they're asking if you can afford $3 billion for this, well, why can't you afford $1 billion for education? In the United States, they're saying if you can afford $500 billion for a new aircraft carrier and planes and weaponry, well, why do we have to start charging students double for the interest on their school loans?
I've noticed that you've done a lot of work on human trafficking,
Yes.
trafficking in persons, and you've called it the modern day slavery. Why is this issue so important to you? Why are you so passionate about it?
You know, I became aware of it years ago with how bad it was getting because I always knew it was there. I mean, I knew that there was modern day slavery. It exists in places in Africa to this day, and where people are actually considered slaves. And I knew people were being put into forced labor situations. But I had no idea how widespread it was, how it was everywhere in the United States, how people were having their passports taken away from them. They were being forced to work for next to nothing, where other human beings take advantage of them. It's really greed, is what it's about. It's about the greed of one man. In order to make a lot of money, they find out that by taking a human being, and you know, usually it involves somebody crossing a border illegally. They have something on them. They can hold their passport. They can't go anywhere. They can't seek help. And a lot of times, if these people sought help, they would be arrested because it was perceived that they had done something illegal. We're trying to break all of that down now. But it affects an estimated 30 million people today.
Now, speaking of the movement of persons, I want to get your perspective on immigration because I know it's a big issue in America. It's all about keeping, well, from what I gather, a lot of the conversation is about keeping new immigrants out, building that wall across Mexico and so on. Here in the Caribbean, we're on the other side of the fence, almost literally. We suffer the effects of our persons leaving for places like the United States. We have that brain drain where our educated people are leaving. So what's your perspective on that entire immigration debate?
There's no one easy solution. Let's just say that. It's a complex problem. The United States willfully ignored it for years. The legislators, everybody ignored it for years because they were benefiting from it. Lower labor costs meant lower prices. Some industries where American citizens didn't want to work, people coming from the Caribbean or coming from Latin America were willing to work in those, willing to get ahead, to send money back to their families, hopefully to build a life for themselves. You know, Americans weren't the only ones, people from the United States weren't the only ones that had the American dream. Other people wanted to believe in that too. And they would have come legally if they could have. And I think a lot of people have to look today to see what is the way that we can give somebody a 5-year visa or a 7-year visa to allow them to come to the United States and to work. Citizenship is not automatic, but they get to come there and work and maybe take the skills that they have learned back home to their own country and have a choice to rebuild the life in their own country.